Call to order the Thursday, October 18th, 2018 meeting of the Sebastian City Planning and Zoning Commission. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mr. Roth.
Here.
Mr. Simmons.
Here.
Ms. Cottenberg.
Here.
Mr. Carter.
Present.
Mr. Reyes.
Here.
Mr. Motti.
Here.
Mr. Kizelbosch.
Here.
Mr. Eugen.
Here.
Mr. Alvarez.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no announcements for this evening. We have a full quorum. Our alternate members will be observing and giving comment, but not voting this evening.
Chairman, I'd also like to change the agenda so that we're not approving the minutes of 20,188, but 2018. I'm so sorry. I did
So happy about that. Okay.
I was feeling young, actually.
Okay. You have all had an opportunity to review said minutes. And if there are any additions or corrections?
Commissioners, I'd also like to note under this section, Mr. Simmons did catch this, that the header on your minutes does state regular meeting of July 19th, that should be October 4th, and Ms. Cottenberg does have the corrected minutes for her to sign for the original signature for our clerk's office.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
The set that you have to sign to take to the city clerk office has had that change. It wasn't relevant to the content of the minutes, but it was a header mistake on that.
Thank you.
Caught that.
Any additions or corrections? We'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes of October 4th, 2018.
I'll second it.
David.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You done? I'll second it then. With the correction.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Were you in favor?
Any opposed?
I don't know.
Thank you. Okay. This evening we have a public hearing, and if our attorney would read the ordinance for us.
Yes, this is a recommendation of the City Council and the first public hearing for an amendment to the Land Development Code. It's Ordinance O-18-10, an ordinance of the City of Sebastian, Florida, amending Land Development Code Section 54-2-7.7 regarding walls and fences, providing for severability and repeal of laws in conflict, providing for codification, providing for scrivener's errors, and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do you have a presentation for us?
Actually,
Yes.
before we get started, if we could have a disclosure of any ex parte communications, and then I'll swear in the witnesses.
Thank you. Has anyone here had any ex parte communication with anyone of interest?
No.
Anyone who wishes to speak on this matter could stand and raise your right hand. Are you guys want to speak on this? No? Okay. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. This is the ordinance that was prepared regarding our last meeting's discussion on amendments and changes to the fence and wall ordinance, which was, for the record, requested by City Council to look at this section because of the amount of variances that they had been, Board of Adjustment brought before them for the request for the increased size of fences to 8 feet. We took our discussion ideas that we had, and I actually ended up having to type the whole section, which was the best thing, because as I went section by section, I was able to find out some of the areas that I thought needed to be updated, kind of modified and changed with the ideas that we had from our discussion. I did give you a bullet list on the memo of the actual things that we did change. I did want to kind of just let you know regarding, there was a couple of things that, approvals that I did change that planning and zoning would normally give, but I think most of you can say that the time that you've been on the board, that I've been here, I think one barbed wire fence had been brought before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I felt that that was something that as long as staff could verify that the arms go up and not over a property, that would be something that staff could sign off administratively, and we changed that from going before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the other thing was the temporary construction fences. I could not think of any scenario where if a project got held up or stopped, that you would make them take down their security fence in the middle of a construction because it was going past 180 days, and felt that that was more tied to the building permit anyway, so we did take that kind of that approval away from the commission. But we did go ahead and add the administrative variance process and the condition criteria for an 8-foot fence. And with, we had 3 criteria there. Hopefully we clarified and modified that secondary front corner explanation of where a fence could go. And at your recommendation, we said that any fence, the finished side, if it's facing a street, the finished side would have to face that street. So we added that, that verbiage into, I believe, is a section on the types of fences allowed. Some of it was some cleanup. Our section that asks, that requires screening around dumpsters did not include recyclable dumpsters, so we wanted to add that so that it was clear. And we also, let me see what else we did. Some of the cleanup, the affidavit, recorded affidavit for fences and easements. And at the request of the attorney, added more of a formal section because there are some things that staff can make decisions on, or the community development director, a process for an appeal. And if they disagree with the decision or interpretation of staff, that appeal would come to you. And then if they still appealed that decision, that would go to the Board of Adjustment, City Council, and so on through that chain of acknowledgement. So with that, staff is recommending to make a recommendation to City Council on this ordinance, but definitely want to open up for discussion if you still see any changes or things that you think need to be modified before we send this to City Council.
Okay.
Madam Chair, could I
Yes.
add one thing? I'm like just blindly following the agenda, and after this got started, it dawned on me that this isn't a quasi-judicial matter.
No.
As a text amendment, it's a legislative matter, so, but swearing in witnesses never hurts. So, I mean, we didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to make sure we understood that this was not quasi-judicial, so.
Thank you. Okay, is there anybody from the public who has any input on this ordinance? Seeing none?
I do have one question on the temporary.
Yeah.
And so basically you say temporary, obviously is removed no later than 10 days after construction is completed. Of course, this looks back a few years, but for a while we had construction here that never did get completed.
So there was, staff looked at 2 different types of fences. There's your silt, those silt fences, the construction silt fences that are, those are required for our stormwater permit, and that's more for the drainage. So that was not the type of temporary construction fences that we were talking about. That's why I added it in there. But I'm thinking more of your chain link fences that would come up for construction, for security, or around an area that you didn't want the public to access. And I believe that that was the intent of the temporary construction fences. It was more like a chain link fence, or even if it was a wood fence. And so it's usually something like that. If it was something where construction did stop and it was 6 months and there still was no activity, you know, we would still have to review on if it was still safe for that fence to be up, if it was still a good idea to have that fence up. So, but I believe that it should be more in the hands of the building official than more of planning and zoning. It would still be considered a temporary fence. So that was our thought on removing it, having to come before you.
Thank you.
I have a question in regards to that as well, Dory. Under the proposed amendment, then, there's no number of days restriction whatsoever now?
Well, just for a temporary construction
Correct.
fence, and This could be for residential and/or commercial. Of course, I'm thinking more of the commercial is the one that's going to be putting up more of a chain link or a type of security fence. But we certainly wouldn't allow them until a land clearing would have to be issued, a land clearing permit. And at that point, they may be bringing equipment on site. So until there was a formal permit in hand, would a temporary construction fence go up? And then, yes, 10 days after a CO is issued or something, we would require that fence to
Now,
come
is there
down.
a time limit on those type permits? What happens if they don't continue with the construction? Will those permits expire, and then will the temporary fence have to be taken down?
Well, that's what we're saying, is they're exempt from permitting, so they're not getting a permit for this temporary fence. And
I understand that, but I'm talking about, you're talking about the building permit.
Oh, yes,
Land, land clearing and all that.
So they have, if there's a certain amount of time that inactivity goes by or inspections, those permits can become null and void also that the building department issues.
Will they be required then to remove the temporary fencing?
I think we could look at it as case-by-case basis. If there's a large hole that has water, or there's a stormwater pond that hasn't been finished, it may be safe to keep a fence up. Maybe we just would have it around the pond. So I don't want to make a general. There's not too many of those cases that happen, but I think we would look at it as a case-by-case.
Well, I'm getting, my feeling is, something that's temporary is for a limited amount of time. But the way we're leaving it now, and we really didn't discuss this in the last meeting, is that now it's open-ended. The fence can stay there forever and ever and ever, and it's no longer temporary.
But could you think of a scenario where if a job construction stopped and it was still kind of, after a certain time, the city's requiring you to have to go in there and stabilize it. I got to be honest, we're getting close to the site next to the library. There's been some inactivity there.
Yeah.
We're looking to possibly let them know, okay, whatever the issues are, we need that stabilized with some sod and maintained. But would there be a scenario where you would have them take a fence down?
Not off the top of my head, but we've run into situations like this, and something that we can't think of now possibly could arise. That's my only concern, because the way the ordinance will read now is that this temporary fence, quote unquote, is never ending. It can stay there forever and ever.
Would you like to
Without
add
being permitted in any way, shape, or form.
should we have a defined temporary amount of months or that you would?
I'll
chime in on that. So the site that's under construction now is bankrupt or whatever, and there is a hazardous site in there. I would want to keep that temporary fence around that site, temporary, I guess. So now I'm arguing, I'm bringing up an argument there.
And that's kind of where I'm getting at.
To keep the public safe.
I still think that there still needs to be a time limit on it, but I think it should, again, be the discretion of your department that if you want to extend it, then you can. But, because again, as Mr. Reyes was talking about, there could be a situation where we don't want to have people to have access into it.
True.
But we need to have some accountability that if it's just going to stay there, nothing's going to happen. The people who started it, there should be, I think, some kind of enforcement involved that, they need to at least get it back to a safe condition.
I have no problem adding a definite time in what is considered temporary. I know that we wouldn't leave the fence as the only means to let a site sit there for 5 or 6 years and they don't have to do anything with it. I mean, if there was some other dangerous situation or some stabilization, stormwater concerns, we certainly would work with the developer.
Yeah, we
but,
never know what will happen. So I think there needs to be some kind of enforcement involved.
Could we, per chance, use wording relating to the cessation of construction? Let's say if there has been no active construction on the site for a period of 90 days, then the owner must secure the lot and remove the temporary fence? Or 120 days, or?
Well, I don't have a problem with the 180 days that was originally in there.
Yeah.
But I think there should be some kind of, time limit that something needs to happen at that point if you're not continuing with what you plan to do.
But you said secure the property. So again, we're still looking at fencing the property if we say secure it.
No, I'm thinking of dangers.
Right.
I'm thinking of the swimming pool, they dug the hole and they never put the pool in and they never put the fence up. Or there is a building site with
That's what exactly along the
floating
line I'm
debris and
thinking.
stuff like that. And when I say secure the site, that's, I don't mean fence it, I mean make it safe.
Well, it's a part of construction activity, and it should be, goes into the building department.
Yeah.
So,
Under the safety issue.
Yeah.
And if it is your desire, we can take it back to any fence that's up longer than 180 days comes back before the board, if you want to, you know.
I don't think it needs to come back to the board. We do like what we've done with the other things that have come back to the community director's office. And y'all make have an administrative decision on that. But I think there still needs to be some accountability for that temporary fence.
As I say, I feel that the construction fences and on these sites really are more in the purview of the building official and because he ultimately is responsible for that site once a permit is issued for construction. And I hate to say just 180 days past the cessation, I know that's 6 months, but sometimes if there is a change of ownership or you've got to go for refinancing, I mean, it could be more than 6 months. I was thinking more like after an annoyable amount of time, like a 12 months or 18 months, where there's still some site with a fence up, that at that point, we would go into something. I don't know, maybe that's too long of what you're looking at, but.
We really don't know what situation would bring forth. But you could have a situation where you have a project under construction that goes into bankruptcy and you have structures that are up. Now, that left alone constitutes an unsafe condition because you have kids in there, people could be in there. So we have to say, the temporary fence, or how do we secure the property? Do we go back to the building official?
So when you're like, and I'm thinking more of the commercial sites, but you're thinking more residential where they just have the silt fence up. I'm thinking more, I don't know so many scenarios where a residential construction project is putting up a chain link fence. And I felt that was the intent of this, is those temporary wooden or chain link fences that were up. Are you speaking of the silt fences that are going around the residential properties that you want down, or?
I'm thinking commercial. I don't know what y'all think. I'm thinking more commercial, because typically, if a homeowner's putting in a pool or whatever, they've already got the financing, they're going to take it to conclusion. Many times we've seen, big projects go into bankruptcy for whatever reason. And then, nothing happens for an extended amount of time.
well, 100 and 180 days are fine, because that goes under the building department. If there is no activity, no inspection, call for the permit, and the building department give notice to the contractor.
Yes.
What's going on
Is that
with
what
this
typically
permit?
happens?
Yeah,
Yes.
The building department does
And I
that?
believe it is 6 months.
Yeah,
If there's
6 months,
no
yeah.
inspections or inactivity on a property, they look at that permit
they want
and they
to gear
can,
towards
they can
that.
null and void the permit and make you have to reapply all over, but, unless, like I said, we can add a definitive time if you want to put in there, after a certain amount of time, the site should be reevaluated by the building official, or?
That's what I would like to see, something to that effect. Because I totally agree with, leaving something open-ended, it's not good. And going back to letting the building department recheck it, that's good. The other point in this we touched on, and you kind of questioned it, Dory, was silt fences. I can remember years ago on 512 seeing a silt fence that was up for quite a long time, upwards of a year around a construction site, and it really looked pretty nasty. And it was obvious somebody was under, financial duress, and they just weren't taking care of it.
Are we talking about the silt barriers for washout
Yes,
The black,
on roadway projects?
yes.
That's to protect our environment, is
Yeah.
the purpose of that.
yeah.
So that's what you mean by this pollution prevention plan for stormwaters?
Yes, the city's NPDES, and I apologize, I don't know exactly what that stands for, but that's the city's master stormwater permit from St. John's to have all our canals, and that requires any construction site to have these soil erosion fences put
Yeah,
up
it's
so that
erosion
that
control.
doesn't run into the,
But for them to get their climb on these roads, don't they have to have that all cleaned up? Because it's almost like a windrow that builds up against it.
yes. So if those silt fences are not installed properly, or they do get bared down. I know our environmental planner checks those and goes
Yeah,
out.
I
and
know
the
there's
contractor has to amend
inspections
them.
on them. They have routinely inspections to make sure they're actually protected. There's no blowouts on them and stuff, so.
Yes.
I think those are already covered, or usually, I haven't seen many projects where they leave them behind after the project's done. The last thing you see that goes.
They won't approve it.
We had added it in there so that it's covered after, 10 days after the construction's completed, all of those fences need to come down. Because you don't really need that silt fence anymore after you've got your stabilization and everything.
They like to pick up the wood anyways, overuse the wood, huh? The pearl. Good business.
Well, the project I mentioned was never completed. It still isn't to this day, but.
I will go back, we'll work with staff, with Lisa and the building official, and add maybe a definite term on this. This isn't coming back to you, this is the public hearing and your recommendation in your motion, if you want to make that as a, not a condition, but to staff to address that section on the temporary fences, if that's the consensus of the board, and we'll certainly put something in there that, that will apply to your concern on it being open-ended.
Okay. I think we've gotten a little bit sideways here, so just to keep things,
We were on
Well,
temporary.
this, what they were talking about wasn't discussed last meeting.
right. Okay, the hearing part is then officially closed, and we will go into discussion now.
Thank you.
And we'll start
Bill?
down this end. Mr. Simmons,
I'm okay.
okay?
I'm okay, I'm fine with what we have.
I have a
Mr.
few
Reyes.
questions,
Sure.
as always.
Good.
Some of them aren't strikeouts, it's prior language. When you mentioned that the fences or walls should withstand the forces of wind, what type of wind?
I do leave.
I mean, are you gonna force me to build a fence that'll withstand 180 mile an hour winds? And the other case there is, on an 8-foot span on a 6-foot fence, should I not have 3 4x4s? You know, should they be a certain distance apart? And I see where we're getting away with it in the city here, where you're letting them spread at the 6-foot panel, where those fences usually come down. It's a bigger cost to the homeowners, but I went through it, because when I read it in the building code, you should have that extra panel or that extra 4x4 on an 8-foot span. So I see a lot of new fences going up where they're not allowing that, and they're gonna be scattered around the neighborhood when a good storm comes through. So I think that's just opening force of wind to a lot, you know, nature's, I don't know there. That was one.
Excuse me, could that not be tied into, is it mentioned in the building code specifically?
For
Could it
certain
not be tied
heights,
to that?
yes, that you should have a certain amount of the 4x4s supporting it, you know. It's almost like, you know, you can't run a roof beam, you know, 12 feet out and only have a header at a certain point. There's loads and stuff. Same thing with Boeing and when the wind comes. I'm not an engineer, I'm a surveyor, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
And I'm not sure if, I mean, we always rely on the building department to actually issue those permits for the fences, assuming that that's what they're looking at. I don't know if their application necessarily if you have to state how far apart your posts were. I did ask the building official, though, that if we did go to 8-foot fences, some of these variances that have been granted already in the code, is that a different, you know, structure that they would need, that the posts are closer, because you do have a larger fence that has that extra wind effort on it, and he said he was gonna look into it. He didn't at this point I think the intent of this section, though, is to state, even though we have fences and the specific materials that you can be, I'm thinking, you know, you can't have a cloth fence or something like that, because that's not going to necessarily withstand the forces of nature. I'm not sure. I got to be honest, I didn't think that we needed to change this. I don't know what the actual intent was, but I think it also goes in to say that you can't have a fence that's going to be blocking any type of canal or the waters of a ditch or something, and that's also part of that, and I didn't want to touch
The free flow of that.
that paragraph.
And I'm gonna touch on that too.
Yeah.
That's under item 4, actually, under that.
Yes, on page 2.
On the required screens for garbage, refuse, and recycle dumpsters, does that include our recycle bins in our homes?
No, and that's why I made sure that it was clear. It's under the, as you can see, there's a section that says fences and walls in residential areas, and this is located in the section that's in non-residential districts. So that's going to be pretty much everything except residential. So even your public services, your churches, industrial areas, that's covered in that section.
So do we have rules for our dumpster, or our recycle
No.
bins? Do they have to be behind the front line of the house or anything like that? Okay. I've been breaking the rule if there is, so I'm just trying to figure it out so that I fix it. Fences within easements. You mentioned here on the changes and all that, and that the homeowner can get an affidavit signed off by the different utility companies allowing them to put their fence in an easement. For the fences within easements, it said the shall provide the city with an affidavit acknowledging that the fence will be located in the easement and the city or utility company is not responsible, where we would have to remove it at our own cost.
Yes.
Okay, so I prior came for this fence, and I wanted to put it in the center of the easement that I maintained. I'm gonna chime that in. Utility companies were fine with it, but the city wasn't. So you mentioned that there is an area for to be able to appeal staff decision. Is that what you mean by that? Where I can, if all the utility companies are allowing me to put my fence in the easement, me acknowledging that I have to remove it later, but your staff says, no, we own these easements, and we're not gonna allow you to do that. But they've never maintained my easement, so I'm curious as to what you mean by that.
So in the appeals section, it states that any actions of the community development director as allowed by this section. So this is where we approved the barbed wire fences, the administrative variances for the 8-foot fences, and I think there's one other, there's either 3 or 4, that this section has given the director the okay to make the decision. That's what this is appearing to. That was more of, that's through the actual fence application, and that was the decision of the city as because they were one of the grantees of the easement. It had been dedicated to public utility and drainage entities. And that was the decision of the city that that particular ditch or easement that must be on your house, that they either maintain or whatever they do, dig out, but it was that decision of stormwater department to not allow a fence in your easement. That's part of the application process that goes through there. There probably is a way that you can appeal, but not this section from this article, from this walls and fence one. I'm not sure. There must be in the building department under their permit. They must have also a paragraph of the process to appeal the decision from that. And I can look into that for that, but that's not covered. That's not what we're talking about on the appeals in that paragraph.
That's fine.
If I can piggyback onto that, because this is an important section, and the most important part of it, in my perspective, is the one single word, recorded.
Yes, that was the change. We kind of cleaned it up, but that was...
Yeah.
And I run into issues like on a daily basis with properties that change hands, and there are things in the easement, and it doesn't ever come up till the last minute, and it's a problem. If it's recorded, it'll be part of the...
As I recall our discussion, though, we didn't want this to be punitive, but we wanted it to address a future homeowner that would be there with that. He wasn't told of the fences in the easement. Now, though, I mean, there's written proof that, yes, it is in the easement.
Well, the survey shows the homeowner, whoever's buying it shows them that, and I was actually tying into a adjoining fence that is into the easement, and it's still into the easement, and many other along the line. And I'm now questioning, my neighbor's fence in the back went down from a storm, and they put up a temporary wire fence there so that their dog doesn't run out, but it's in the easement. So is that allowed?
The wire fence, again, materials allowed it's the unit for chain link fence. Anything less than that, chicken wire, just a wire fence, technically is not allowed.
So if he wanted to construct and fix that fence that went down, he can actually be in the easement because his original fence was there?
If that's where his original fence permit was issued for. if he is moving any section of that fence and now moving it into an easement, he would need to do a revised fence permit to let the
Understood.
city know, and then the city or any of the utilities would make that decision if it could go in the easement.
Okay, thank you. You're up, Mr. Moss.
On the appeal that is on page 7G that Mr. Reyes was just talking about, it's pretty restrictive that the person who wants to appeal must do that within 10 days. Do they have to provide evidence to show why they're appealing it, or do they just file a motion and say they're appealing it to lock in their time?
No, you have to, and that was the last sentence, you've got to include information on exactly what are you appealing, what part of the decision or the interpretation, and usually you'll give some backup or something for that, and that then would come, that section there's another section referred in that paragraph. That section, it determines on which board hears the appeal. There are certain scenarios where the appeal would go to the Board of Adjustment. Some of the appeals would come to you. Some go to City Council, and that's why we referred to that section. Based on, so the section that we just created on the 8-foot variances, the 8-foot fences, that administrative variance, if somebody appealed that goes to the Board of Adjustment. If somebody was appealing one of the barbed wire fence or one of the other decisions that we now make the director to make, that would come to you. So that section does set up on who would hear that. But yes, of course, you would, an appeal is a quasi-judicial hearing. And at that point, there is evidence and things that you have to submit for the basis of your appeal.
But to formally lodge the appeal, it has to be more than just a letter saying we want to appeal and get on the agenda. It has to show reason for it.
Normally, it can't be just a sentence that says, I'd like to appeal this. Usually you're giving because of, or you're attaching pictures, you're attaching some other examples of things. Usually there's some backup that we usually ask for it anyways.
Okay, I just didn't want them coming in and then going to the Board of Adjustment, which is council, and have them put it on the agenda and.
Yeah, and no, that's what that last sentence states, that you have to include information concerning the disputed issues of the decision.
Okay, then it becomes, and who makes the decision then once that comes in to look at it, to say this is a valid appeal? The resident might say it is, but.
Well, for staff and other appeals that we've done.
They all go to council. Yeah, there's not going to be any gatekeeper on the appeals. If a citizen feels that the decision wasn't proper and wants to appeal it to the Board of Adjustment,
Okay.
they have every right to go there. So we would put them all. Now, the Board of Adjustment might take 30 seconds with it, or they might take a half hour with it, depending on how much merit they give it. But if we put some sort of gatekeeper in it, it would pretty much be just giving staff 2 bites at the apple, and it would never let the citizen get beyond staff. So we have to give them that opportunity to get past staff to somebody else.
Okay. I'm going back to that proverbial corner lot. I just can't get it in my head, the different height restrictions on that. Could you try and go through that one more time without a picture to explain
Sure.
where the 4 and the 6 foot is and the setbacks?
Sure, so you know that each zoning district is different, but we'll use the RS10, and you have setbacks. And let's say that you are you're in what we call an interior lot. You have your front setback, which is 25 feet, your side setbacks are 10, and your rear is 20. If you're a corner lot, you actually have 2 front yards. So the zoning districts establish what that secondary front yard setback is. In RS10, it's 20 feet. So there's a verbiage in here in one of the paragraphs that says that you can put a fence on all of your property lines. It's the code then distinguishes as where it has to jump down to 4 feet. So on a corner lot, currently, and after we discussed it, you wanted to keep it at the 20-foot lot, the 20-foot setback. Anything then towards your property line on that street has to jump down to 4 feet. Now, the secondary front yard for the setback is 20 feet, and the newer homes on corner lots, they're actually putting their they're putting their house at that 20 feet. So it's usually anything behind their house then that they can run. And we had talked about possibly changing that to 10 feet, but it was your consensus to keep it at that 20 feet. So we left it at that, and then based on our other discussion, though, regarding good side in, good side out, you had determined that you would like any fence that's facing a street, whether it's in your front or on that secondary front yard, that the finished side will now face the street, which we added into that.
So hypothetical, if they have 30 feet on their, quote, side yard, which is fronting another street,
Side yard or secondary front yard, because that's different.
Two different things.
Yes, secondary front yard is a corner lot. You have two
well, that's
front-
what I was referring to, as a corner lot.
Okay.
So where does it then, from the front of the house, if you draw a line perpendicular or parallel with the current road the house faces, you draw a line out to the other street that it's on the corner of, how far out from the front corner of the house can they go? If it's 30 feet, can they go 10 feet out?
Yes. Yes,
And that's
on that
the-
secondary front yard, yes.
Okay. I don't see any of that in here, but I guess that's, I mean, that I could understand anyway,
I
I'm
tried to
sorry.
make it a little bit more clear, because I thought the other one was very hard.
I'm on a corner, and you made it very well explained to me when I had to apply for my permit. Beyond the front line of the house, I was only able to put that's considered my secondary front.
Right.
A 4-foot fence around there. Now, if I wanted to stay at my right-of-way line, back from there, I was allowed only 4 feet, but if I wanted 6 feet on that side, I had to be, what, this 30 or 20?
20 feet.
Where I would have a 6-foot here, then I'd have to jog down to 4 feet to come around the corner of the lot.
Okay, that's what I was concerned about, was that, vehicle visibility, coming
It does
up.
not affect the site triangle, the visibility triangle.
And that's what we had added. I hoped it was clear, that it says that you can have on that secondary front lot, you can have a 6-foot fence, provided it does not extend into the required secondary front yard setback, which means anything going towards that street, then you have to drop down to 4 feet. So the code says, here's where you can have the 6-foot fence. Anything that's now extending into that secondary front yard has to drop down to 4.
Okay,
But what I think is odd, you will allow me to put a hedge there that can be 8 feet tall.
When we were reviewing this section and the visibility triangle, when we had thought about maybe we could, if you wanted it to go 10 feet or to a different setback, there is a section in this general regulations that does talk about a visibility triangle, and it does talk about that nothing can be more than 2 feet high.
The trellis?
In that triangle, not a trellis, but, well, yes, a trellis or anything
Oh,
that was
you
in this
mentioned that in there.
triangle. It couldn't be more than 2 feet high, a wall, landscaping, but it is just a triangle. It wouldn't run the whole length of your property.
So on my corner now, I'm inside that radius at the corner. I'm in my property, not in the right-of-way. I'm not allowed to put a hedge on the inside there that can be 8 feet tall?
As long as it's not in the visibility triangle. And in that section, there was 30 feet from the intersection points, and it talked about driveways, because there's a visibility triangle for each driveway that backs out also.
Right. Interesting, thank you.
one last question. On page 6, item 3, it references maintenance, and I'm just questioning, why remove the last sentence, which is, the city may remove the fence?
We added it to because this was the maintenance paragraph, it's actually, we just moved it right up above. If you see the
I see it up
underline.
there, but
Because that was more of, it was under, I thought it was more the appropriate paragraph, property owner responsible for removal cost. And this is basically saying, it was under the removal paragraph instead of a maintenance, and we just relocated that sentence.
okay, could anyone split hairs and say, this is a maintenance problem, it's not actually a situation that you're referring to, that it, where is it? I flipped the wrong page. It's not actually a removal, but it's a maintenance issue. Could anyone split points on that and say, we don't have to pay for it because it's maintenance, it's not removal?
Well, that's why we added maintenance, because we can ask you, basically why we added, it wasn't in there, but we can ask you to remove a fence because city needs to do some sort of maintenance in that easement. And then the other sentence is, but in an emergency, we have to take that fence down also. If there's a hurricane, a floodwater storm or something that your fence is too close to a drainage ditch that we need to repair to remove blockage or something, we just added it more into the removal section that says in an emergency, we can take this fence down if it's in our easement.
Okay, if you're comfortable with it, that's fine with me then.
Again, this was kind of some of the cleanup stuff we were just trying to do with the
Okay, that's
ordinance.
it. Finally.
My turn, I only have one thing, and it's just a personal preference. And my personal preference would be that the finished side of a fence always be on the exterior, regardless of whether it faces a street or not. That's just my personal preference.
We were discussing this, and it may be that I can't imagine a homeowner wanting different sides facing, so because we're requiring this, it may just be that the fences end up, I'll be in that because of what you would want constructed in your...
I have no other questions. I think you've done a great job. It's much more understandable than it was, and should make things more efficient.
I have two questions. First of all, back to what David was talking about on the corner lots. If the property owners in residential lots can't block that view, how do the commercial buildings get away from it with building walls on the corners where you have to literally pull your car almost into the lane of traffic to see around that wall?
Well, usually the fences that may come in afterwards, after a site is constructed, we usually try to catch that and look at that. But a lot of the fences and walls that are built, those are on the site plans. So when you approve the site plan, you've given the okay for that fence. And they actually don't come in for a separate permit for those walls and fences because they're on the site plan. So it's all part of that site work when they do that. So I know we try to catch it on intersections.
Yeah, we'll look at it a little.
Yes, I know we try to look at it too.
For now.
I mean, we do that with some of the landscape buffers that we require also, and depending on where driveways are. But that's where you would be catching that on those site plans for.
Okay, and my other question has to do with the affidavit. Does the property owner have to go to the utility companies to get their okay with it, or do they just sign an affidavit saying they're aware that the fence is in the easement and they will remove it if they have to?
Yes, there was a previous process when these concrete in your easements, fences, there actually was, the building department had the fax numbers of 5 different utility companies, had to wait till they all came back. They were adding sometimes 10 to 2 weeks on to just a driveway extension or a fence permit. And so the building official came up with this affidavit with conjunction with the city attorney and came up, and it basically says, I'm aware that I'm putting it in, if I have to take it out, if any of the utility companies, and they were just signing these and notarizing them and then putting them with the permit in the file. It was actually a city manager that said, but now a future owner is not aware that we can come in there and take this down or that it's even in, so that's why we're requiring it to be recorded. Most fences are over, I think, $2,000, where the contractor is already having to record a notice of commencement at the courthouse. So this is just another form that he can have his client sign and they get recorded at the same time.
Okay, but the homeowner doesn't have to go to the utility companies and
Correct.
get their say. Okay, all right. That's all.
It's just an acknowledgement form.
Okay, that's all I have.
You did a good job, Dory. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank
So
you.
I'm okay with that.
I may ask another question. When you mentioned in good repair, maintain, what's your example of in good repair? There's a lot of fences that are falling apart. There's a lot of people that don't have the money to repair some of their
I'll be honest, it can be subjective, but if somebody had a complaint
Suggestive.
about a fence, we would send it to code enforcement.
Okay.
Under their nuisance ordinance, or they could use this, but it would be, their determination if they felt it was not in good repair or if it was a nuisance fence.
All right, thank you.
It's a neighbor responsibility to make a complaint.
Yeah. It's usually on me, no.
That would also fall under unsafe structures.
I'm sorry?
The fence itself would fall under the section of unsafe structures, which gives it the building official the authority to go out and say,
Oh, okay.
you do have to fix it or you do have to take it down.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
I do want to give, not forewarning, but just to let you know, that after we had our discussion, there was an applicant that was waiting to see what your consensus was regarding that corner lot fence at 20 feet. Were you going to be in a consensus to possibly change that? And what we put in the code is your consensus. So just this week, he did apply for that variance to have that fence closer than the 20 feet for a 6-foot fence. Because of early voting, and the next city council meeting is November 28th, which is also the first reading of this ordinance. And based on the agenda, they'll be hearing that variance first. So they may discuss that and also talk about what your recommendation was for that section. They may be in agreement with you, or they may feel that it should be changed too. And maybe it wouldn't be looked at if it wasn't for this variance that is going to be on that same agenda. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that section may be discussed at city council and possibly revised.
Well, we just make our recommendation, and what they do is fine.
That's the 28th of November?
Yes.
And following that line, how about a motion?
I have a motion to close this discussion about fences. That's fine, but I have some other commissioner matters.
We will get to those.
Oh, okay.
We must take action on this
Oh,
first.
I missed a couple of meetings, so I tried to run
We're not done, don't worry. How do we handle the situation on the 180 days, as far as getting the verbiage on that? As far as in our motion?
Do we make that a condition or
leave it alone?
Well, at this point, because this is a recommendation to council, I would say you can, add to your motion, say, move to recommend this to council with the consideration of X, Y, or Z, and make whatever you would like to go with your recommendation. It's a recommendation. They can accept it or reject it anyway, so basically this is your opportunity to say, we discussed it, we like this, but would like you to consider adding this condition to it.
Okay. Would anybody like to venture forth?
Madam Chairman, I'll make a motion that we accept the proposed Land Development Code Amendment, Article 7 General Regulations, specifically Sections 54-2-7, .7 walls and fences, with the consideration of 180 days lead time for temporary fencing.
Second to this?
I'll second that motion.
And let's have a roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
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 Amen.
Thank you.
Motion passed.
Okay, we have no unfinished business. We have no public, so we have no public input. No other new business. Commissioners' matters. This is your chance.
Sure. The project on 512, just, I guess, south of the library, what is ongoing with that?
So that was the Brooks commercial subdivision. It's a one-lot commercial plat that did go before you in 2015.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was the engineer passed away, so he had to get another engineer to continue. They brought in then the construction plans. There was a little delay with the land clearing. They had to get an easement agreement with the subdivision. So we issued the land clearing permit was last October. They have 18 months per our code to actually come in then with a final plat. What they're doing is their one-lot commercial subdivision construction. And so we've noticed that it has been on hold. We wanted to reach out to the developer and let him know that he's got this finite time to complete the subdivision, which was basically, if you remember, there was 2 water bodies on that property. And the reason why he did this is he wanted to clear it so that he could put it up for sale and people could see what it looked like. Well, we don't allow land clearing without a development, without a site plan. And so this was kind of the outside of the box, which we've done on another 1-lot commercial subdivision for them to be able to land clear. But what they were doing is they were redesigning one of the shared ponds that is an actual stormwater pond with the subdivision. And then the water body that's closest to the library will be filled in. And so the subdivision construction was basically to redesign, reconfigure the one pond, fill in the other. They'll grade it then. They've got a final grading plan, and then stabilize it. But the pond hasn't been filled in yet. There's just been some moving around of dirt. But we're going to reach out to the developer and let him know that he has a finite time. If he's not done with that, he still has to final plat, but then he has to put up a bond for the infrastructure and the work that's not done. And usually that kind of prods them on to getting that work done. So when he's done, though, there's not going to be any building or anything there. It will be just a stabilized piece of property. Now you can see it'll be ready to be built because the stormwater has been designed for maximum impervious of the site. And the site plan will certainly come before you then, which you'll see then for the actual building and parking and the stormwater structures.
And how much more time do we have to have it in its current condition?
It was October last year, so 18 months. So they technically do have until spring, but we just wanted to give the developer a heads up about his time.
It just looks really in disarray. It looks unsafe. Some of the lake banks, they started digging those lake banks and they look very unsafe. And now it's wide open where anybody can play there. I mean, there's a silt barrier there. My other question on that site is the culvert that's been put in. Is that a temporary culvert? Temporary drive?
I think there's a permanent culvert that goes underneath the entrance into Sebastian Lakes because it's a shared pond from one of their other storm by the condos, the 2-story condos in Sebastian Lakes. They have a pond and some of that water goes into this. And then there's another pipe that connects into the residential. So there's actually 2 pipes coming out of there.
I'm sorry, the drive, the drainage pipe in the driveway, the temporary driveway
Yes.
for construction, that is
Yes.
temporary?
Yes, that was an Indian River County right-of-way permit. I apologize.
That's not
Misunderstood.
staying there,
Correct.
because they just placed it on muck.
Correct, and they had big concerns with even issuing that because of the closeness to the existing drive, the turning lane, which we kept saying this is just temporary. When the site plan comes in, we may even look at connecting parking lots with the library or something, because they were very concerned too with having a permanent drive off of 512.
I was concerned because there's many of our culverts that they were done improperly in there. When you drive over a drainage ditch, you're gonna hit that bump because
Yeah,
it's been settling.
it's a temporary construction.
And many of them, so. That brings up the stormwater drainage swales that we have. For a little while there, we were maintaining them and doing a pretty good job of whatever contractor the city got. Did we approve the stormwater tax? I believe we did.
Yes,
For some added staff, some added equipment, and it's just, all of a sudden, there's no stormwater action going on as far as cleanup on the swales. There's many of these swales now that are overgrown. I'm curious what's going on there. We added some funding to it, they taxed us on it. Supposedly you have some added staff and equipment, and now it's been abandoned, the maintenance of these swales.
So I can't speak technically on the maintenance and the schedule. I do know that because of the stormwater fee that they recently increased this last year, that you'll see on your tax bill, your non-ad valorem fee, that has been doubled. And that money is being used to, stormwater is now going to be an independent department that's based with this collection of this fee. October 1st, there's supposed to be some additional staff. That's all I can speak of that. I know that that is a very high concern of city council, city manager, to get the maintenance back and these swales cleaned out and the stormwater.
Well, we abandoned it during the storm season. If we would've got hit with a storm, we would've had a lot of flooding. And there again, the only people maintaining it are the guys allowed to mow it to the center of the easement. That's it for me. Thank you. I've been gone a while, so I had a lot of questions.
Well, what I'd like to bring up, recently we looked at new subdivisions being annexed into the town, and questions were asked that were not answered by the developer. One of the things I want to make the board aware of, some people are aware of it, some are not, the amount of vacant lots we have here in Sebastian. According to the vacant residential properties that I got from the county. We have 2,617 vacant buildable lots. So when we look at new subdivisions, I think we should keep that in mind, how many vacant lots we already have available.
I think that was a commercial, mainly commercial subdivision, where we annexed the property.
Both
To
commercial
maybe
and
movie
residential.
theaters and stuff like that.
Combination of both, yeah. I appreciate that. I do think that we also need to be aware that many of those vacant lots are adjacent to and in fact adjoined to properties that already have homes on them with unity of title and will never be built on. As I mentioned, I myself have 3 lots. Many people, so many of those, what shows up there, are not available to be built on. Also, everything that's already on there that's vacant is served by septic tank.
Yes.
Everything that comes in new gets served by a sewer system.
Correct.
So I
That brings
think we
up
need to be
another
real careful about what we ask for.
I can let you know that with our,
Yes.
just to update the board on the Spirit of Sebastian subdivision as one of our annexations. So they have, about a month ago, the preliminary plat did come in. At this time, staff we have a traffic analysis like this that we've sent to our consulting engineer. We're getting the full environmental study on the areas that they are going to be, the pod 1 and 2, designs of the different, the bridges that are going to go over the canal. So at this point, we're working through that process. I don't know if it'll get to you before Christmas, but we're working on getting all that. We've had the other jurisdictions have looked at it. So the preliminary plat did come in, and a lot of the questions that came in with the annexation, the conceptual plan, now have come in with the preliminary plat. So that'll definitely be coming to you as a recommendation to City Council on the actual design and the lots and the setbacks and all of that.
Does any of the other commissioners have anything to
One
bring
more
up?
question. When you mentioned septic tanks, some of the cities and counties have looked into, converting our septic systems to maybe a grinder pump into a small force main. And there was some talk early, I don't know what year it was, about maybe the city here looking into that. One of the questions I asked our new community development director was about grant writing, and she says she's very efficient in it. And I'd like to maybe get her to meet us in one of our meetings and provide us some feedback as to what she is doing and or what if we're trying to go for some grant money to convert our city to a sewer system. So I'm hoping maybe she can. We used to get a lot of feedback, and the engineer would attend our meetings. The city manager would attend our meeting. I love you here, but I want more of the staff
I just get
here
the
also.
fences.
Okay.
But, no, I can, Lisa is actually, the county had done a countywide study regarding, and they have prioritized the areas that would be for grants for the septic. And I can tell you that, yes, she is in current meetings with the county utility systems. They're looking for grants. Any of the grants that the county is looking at to have Sebastian join in with them, it is being organized with a lot of effort and meetings and energy to start working on the septic sewer for the whole city.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's off the septic tanks, by the way. I see where the city council approved the short-term rental. Okay, and I see where the building department's working out some specs for how they're gonna inspect these buildings. How are the people that rent these places how are they gonna find out that this exists, and when will the packets be ready?
So we've had quite a bit of calls already. We are completing, we felt it was, even though it's going to be a checklist used by the building department, we are handing that out in our packet so that they know that they do have to check and make sure that their fire extinguishers are up to date or have been inspected. There'll probably be some information on when you are going to need the gas monitor and make sure that your fire alarms are all working. So that checklist will be part of that. We're very close to being able to send that out. I have addresses of property managers that are waiting for the packet. The ordinance did say they had until December 31st, but we're very close to putting that together and being able to distribute it. And we've also thought about possibly doing some sort of notice in the newspaper There's not really a mailing that we can do, but we had thought about possibly doing that.
So if somebody wanted to come and pick up one of those packets, where would they go? And,
Community Development Department.
Okay.
We'll start with us.
okay, thank you. That's all.
Anyone else?
You okay?
No?
Yes. We're fine.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.